Have you ever blamed yourself for being a coward, for not expressing yourself? Have you ever felt like a fraud at work or school and you're scared that if people were to look deep into your heart, they would realize that you're not good? Or you've ever felt guilty for taking care of yourself? Or you felt selfish for doing something that is in your best interests? Or maybe you feel guilty for doing something good, but since not all of your inner motives were pure, then you hate yourself for that? Or maybe you feel guilty, but you don't know why you feel guilty. You just all of a sudden feel guilty. If you've ever felt any of these feelings, or if you know someone who has felt these feelings, this video is for you. This is video 2 on understanding self-hate. We will focus on self-accusation and all feelings of guilt. What will you get from this video? We will understand and explain 1. How self-accusation starts in the unconscious and why feeling guilty is holding you back in life. Why people feel like a fraud sometimes. Why people feel guilty for the bad motivations behind their good actions. We'll also look into why some people never blame themselves. We'll also look into people who feel guilty for no reason, those who feel guilty for harmless actions. And finally, we will look into the correct way to feel guilty, the healthy versus the unhealthy way of feeling guilty. Let's remember, just because we have a long way to go doesn't mean that we should give up, for the fruits of a healthy mind are boundless. Let's get started. Self-accusation is just another form of self-hate. The person has merciless logic towards himself. If he doesn't reach the absolute of fearlessness, generosity, composure, or willpower, then his pride begins to feel guilty. When people are neurotic, they have this ideal image in their head that they want to become. This image could be the most generous person, or a very courageous man, or the most loving girlfriend. This ideal image in the person's head has no weaknesses. The person wants to become this image and hates himself for not being that image. A simple neurotic problem that is supposed to be examined and worked on then turns into an ugly imperfection, branding the person beyond redemption. Let's say a situation came up and the person realized that he started to appease other people instead of asserting himself. We can see that the person has a problem of appeasing other people. Instead of trying to start work towards expressing himself better and asserting himself, the person starts to beat themselves down for being a disgusting coward, or that they have no guts, or he will feel like people around him despise him for being a weakling. Thus, instead of seeing that he should get better at asserting himself, all he does is to make himself guilty or inferior. And this makes him have a lower self-esteem, which will make it even more difficult to speak up the next time. Self-accusations as to being a fraud or a bluff are the most common. Many times, the person does not feel like they're accusing themselves, but rather they just feel the fear of being found out. The person thinks to themselves that if people really knew him better, they would see that he's not good. And in the next performance, everybody is going to see his incompetence. Again, what exactly might be found out in any test situation remains vague. This feeling of being a bluff does not come out of nowhere. It is the sum total of all the existing unconscious pretenses. It could be a pretense of love, pretense of fairness, a pretense of interest, pretense of knowledge, or a pretense of modesty. But the problem here is not the pretense. The problem is that the person is accusing themselves of being a pretender, and instead of actually trying to look into the feelings of being a pretender and solving them, they instead just feel guilty and fear, which is not constructive to them. I hope you can start to see the tricky part of all of this. Sometimes instead of accusing their faults, the person accuses their reasons for doing things. Now, if the person is scrutinizing themselves so that they can get better, then that is okay. But most times the person is merely fault finding, or they could actually be doing both, fault finding and also trying to get better at the same time. The truth is that our motivations are rarely pure gold. They're usually alloyed with one of the several metals that are less noble than what is visible. But if the major part is gold, we may still call it gold. Let's say you're giving friendly advice to a friend. If your major goal is a friendly intention of constructive help, then we can be satisfied. But the person in the clutches of fault finding will find some faults. He will say, yes, I gave him advice, maybe even good advice, but I did not do it gladly. Part of me hated to be bothered, or maybe I only did it to feel superior to him, so I am a bad, useless person. Now, this is very deceptive because there are grains of truth in this fault. An outsider of little wisdom may ask, but don't you think You should even give yourself more credit for helping your friend even if you didn't feel like it. A victim of self-hate would never see it in this perspective. Even if a friend or a therapist presents things to him in the right perspective, the person is very hard to convince, and this makes it hard to shake neurotics from their self-hate. Even if the person sees that he over-focuses on blaming himself and ignores the good side, he will always try to stick to his verdict. The reason is that the person's logic is very different from that of a healthy person. In his mind, since the advice that was given was not the absolute of helpfulness, then the whole action was morally objectionable, and he starts to beat himself down and refuses himself from being deterred from his self-accusations. Sometimes the person blames themselves for things that they couldn't really do anything about. A good example is an intelligent mother whose child fell off a neighbor's fence while playing with the children who lived there. The child had a slight concussion, otherwise the accident was harmless. The mother then severely accused herself of carelessness for several years. She said that it was all her fault. She said that if she had been present, then the child would not have climbed up the railing and would not have fallen. This mother then decided to become overprotective of her children. Although she knows that an overprotective mother cannot be present all the time, she still stuck to her judgment. The second example is a young actor who hated himself bitterly for temporarily failing in his career. He knew that he was against all odds and everything was beyond his control, but he still hated himself for failing. Even his friends asked him, "What could you have done differently?" But the person could not pin down anything concrete. Here we can see that the person blames themselves for things that are outside of their control. Some types of neurotics always forgive themselves and blame everything on other people and external circumstances. They protect themselves by saying that they did all they could so that they don't have to blame themselves. While others, even if there is something outside of their control, they cannot wait to blame themselves. Well, here are two attitudes that look like opposites, but they are more similar than you think. In both situations, attention is diverted from the subjective factors and focused on external things. In other words, the person is avoiding the real issue and blaming something unrelated. In one, we can see that they blame themselves, but they blame a part of themselves that is not related to the real problem. And the second, blame external circumstances. So they don't blame the real issue. The job of both methods is to protect against the attacks of self-hate for not being one's idealized self. In the example above, the mother was too consumed with her own problems to be a good mother, and that actor actually had issues against making necessary contacts and competing for a job. Both of those people are aware of these problems, but they mention them casually or forget about them. So we can see that it seems like the job of the blame is to blame the person in such a way that he forgets about the real problem and focuses on another weakness. Now, that is a difficult problem to overcome. So in the previous examples, we have to ask, why is it that the young actor and the woman treated their real issues in a very gentle way? They kind of casually just forgot about them, but then started blaming themselves for things that were outside of their control. This gives us a good clue into how self-hate works. The effects of self-hate are so severe that the person must resort to self-protective measures. There are two ways that people do this. They treat their real issues in a very casual and gentle way, and another way is to shift responsibility to outside circumstances. The people who blame themselves for things outside of their control do this because they feel like these factors should not be outside of their control. Consequently, everything that goes wrong reflects on themselves and shows their disgraceful limitations to the ideal image. Okay, now there's another group of people that don't know why they feel guilty, but they just feel guilty. In a desperate search for a solution as to why they feel guilty, they might come up with a concrete self-accusation, and they will believe that they have found a reason why they hate themselves. An example is a person who has realized that he is not interested in other people and feels guilty for not doing enough for them. He tries hard to change this attitude and hopes that by doing so, he'll get rid of his self-hate. But this person will never get rid of his self-hate, and that is because he has put the cart before the horse. Maybe his real neurotic issue is that he feels that he should be superior to other people, and being not interested in them is just a symptom of that superiority belief. But then he accuses himself for not being interested. But the actual self-hate comes from him not actually being superior to the other people, because this is something superficial in his ideal image. So his self-hate will never go because he is solving the wrong issue. He does not hate himself because his self-accusation is valid, but rather accuses himself because he hates himself. Sometimes people may blame themselves for actions or attitudes which seem harmless or even desirable. A person who takes great care of themselves may see himself as pampering himself. A person enjoying food will see it as gluttony. A person considering his own wishes instead of blindly complying will think of themselves as selfish. If a person goes to therapy, which he needs, and he can afford, then he will think of it as self-indulgence. These feelings of guilt can give a clue to what the ideal image is. If the person's ideal image is of severe discipline, only then will the person blame themselves for being a glutton when they eat food. Only a person proud of being humble and disregarding themselves would brand an assertive move as egotistical. Now you may be wondering, should I not feel bad for anything that I do, and should I never blame myself? It is here that we're going to see how neurotic self-accusation contrasts to the healthy conscious. Healthy conscious is a reaction of our true self to the proper functioning or malfunctioning of our total personality. But accusations, on the other hand, come from neurotic pride and express the discontent of the proud self with the individual not measuring up to the idealized self. Self-accusation is not for the true self, but is directed against the true self and is meant to crush it. The uneasiness that comes from our conscious can be constructive because it can set in motion a constructive examination of what is wrong with a particular behavior or even with our way of living. We try to face the faulty attitude which has come to our attention without magnifying or minimizing it. We try to find out what is wrong with ourselves and work towards overcoming our problems. Self-accusation, on the other hand, comes to the conclusion that the whole personality is no good because it does not measure up to something, and it just stops right there. Self-accusation is not interested in getting better or, seeing what is wrong and fixing it. It just wants to crush the real self. So the road to recovery is a 3-step process. The first stage is understanding the problem that you have. The second stage is doing constructive work to overcome your problem. And the third stage is where we all want to be, the healthy state where you just maintain the healthy state. This video is part 2 of understanding self-hate. That is a bigger picture. The recognizing that you have an issue should not fool you into thinking that you have healed. Knowledge that you have the issue is just the tip of the iceberg. You have to undergo hard winter training in order to overcome this issue. But just because we have a long way to go doesn't mean we should give up, for the fruits of a healthy mind are boundless. Thank you. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to the channel and also check out my other videos. Thank you.